am pleased to be joined by Randy McClure of the Rush the Court blog. How's it going, Randy?
Doing all right. Enjoying all this March Madness. How about you?
I'm doing wonderful. It's been a crazy NCAA tournament so far. I mean, UCLA with their magical run. What have you thought about their performance so far?
It's funny to think about UCLA doing anything magical in March, right? As far as like an underdog. I made a tweet the other night that caught some attention because I was like, it's really an awesome story that this plucky underdog from Southern California, like a water polo school, has made this kind of run in basketball. Because the old timers think of UCLA as the bluest of blue bloods, but the younger folks don't really remember a lot from UCLA. The past 10 or 15 years, really since Ben Howland was there and Kevin Love and Russell Westbrook, they've been relatively down. So it's kind of funny that they've had a couple coaches. They went with Mick Cronin out of Cincinnati, who honestly, that hire got a lot of flack nationally and locally there in the Los Angeles area. And look how it's worked out. I mean, amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I didn't know much about him before he got hired by UCLA. And it's just crazy how UCLA, it was the first Final Four since 2008. And then you, like I said, you mentioned you have to go back to Kevin Love and Russell Westbrook. And to be honest with you, I used to always talk with my dad. He used to be a huge fan of UCLA. He used to know, like, back in the day when they had Kareem and Bill Walton, and he always talked about how good they were. And to be honest with you, I hadn't really seen how good UCLA was until this year, really. I mean, it's just crazy. I think they're more of a redemption story.
Yeah.
What really shocks you about UCLA this year? How do you think they've been able to make it this far?
They had a good season. They really got downgraded by how they ended the regular season. And I don't know how closely you follow them, but I'm based on the West Coast. And so I get a little more attention because, it's like the games aren't at, midnight for me. But they had a kind of a stretch there. The last 4 games of the regular season in the Pac-12, they lost all 4 of them. But, they were pretty good before that. And the thing about those 4 games is a couple of them were on the road against good teams, Colorado and Oregon. And then they lost to USC at home. And there was a buzzer beater. They, in fact, probably should have won that game. And we know how good USC was, maybe not at that time, but we certainly saw that over the last few weeks. So, and then they went to the Pac-12 tournament, and they were the higher seed against Oregon State. And it was, again, at the time, everybody's like, oh my God, you lost to Oregon State. You had a 16 or 18 point lead in the first half. You lose in overtime. UCLA sucks. They're done, right? And they barely scraped into the tournament and made it into the first 4. But they were really downgraded by that stretch. But you look back at it now and you're like, it wasn't that bad. They were all pretty close games. They had Oregon State went to the Elite Eight. USC went to the Elite Eight. Oregon and Colorado represented well. So, they just had a little bit of bad luck and they had some tough games. But they were good all year, even though they took some hits with some personnel losses. And I think the real thing that mattered for them was Juzang. I always have trouble saying his name. Really came on. He came alive in the last month playing basketball. He's averaging about 22 points a game. He's become a playmaker for them in a way that maybe that couldn't have been predicted, even 2 or 3 months ago for UCLA. So, I guess it is surprising. Okay, that certainly the Michigan win was very surprising, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. I think they were always probably better than an 11 seed. They've had some good luck, and they've made some plays down the stretch of multiple games to get there. But at the end of the day, it's still a compelling story because they don't have the talent that the other teams in certainly the higher seeded teams in this tournament have had.
Yeah, you just mentioned Juzang. I think I said that name right. I'm struggling with it too. He had 25 points in the win. He
carried him.
Yeah, he had half of UCLA's points, and they managed to win. I just thought it was interesting to see Michigan had 2 chances right at the end, and both times Wagner missed it. So I don't know. It feels like this UCLA team is more of a redemption story than anything. And like I said, the first 4 team out, or first they were in the first 4, ended up beating Michigan State, and then they've made this magical run. Do you think there's a chance they beat Gonzaga? I don't think there is, but do you think there's any chance they beat them?
there's always a chance, right? But I mean, it's like a sliver of a chance. I think if they played 100 times, UCLA might win one or two. I mean, I think it's that level of a mismatch. They had so many good bounces in the Michigan game, and Michigan's not as good as Gonzaga, but they had, Michigan missed their last 8 shots over a course of about 3 or 4 minutes in that game. They took some bad shots. The one in particular I hated was Wagner taking a 3 from 24 feet. Yeah, they left him and he can hit that, but you know what? You're 6'11", 7 feet, and they've got a guy underneath in foul trouble. And I know they went down there and they missed some layups, but you just got to keep pounding it in and get to the line, if nothing else. But to try to take that 3 in that situation, and they had some come up short. Going back to Gonzaga though, they're too strong. The Zags are too strong for UCLA to really match them, and the problem being, the defense is going to create, same as Michigan, create some pretty big droughts for UCLA. They don't have the offensive firepower to be able to hang with them for long periods of time. And what ends up happening is a 2-point game becomes a 12-point game. And now a 12-point game later on becomes a 16 or 18 or 20-point game. And they can't come back from that against a team like Gonzaga that is so good at getting the ball in the right spots and getting offense on a consistent basis. You don't see Gonzaga have 5-8 minute droughts very often. And it's because they have so many weapons. So long story short, it has been a magical run, but it ends on Saturday for the Bruins.
Yeah, I think the same, and I think most people that watch college basketball think the same thing. Speaking of Gonzaga, a lot of people are questioning: is Gonzaga a blue blood? Some people are calling him a mid-major. What would you call Gonzaga?
Yeah, I think the term I'm using is new blood, right? They're new blood, and so it's kind of like this counter to the blue bloods. Blue bloods, in my mind, they don't really change. They're historically great. They have ups and downs, but they always come back. It's Kansas, Kentucky, it's Indiana, it's UCLA, and it's North Carolina and Duke, and that's it. Syracuse is not in there. Connecticut has won 4 national championships. They are not in there. But Gonzaga is a new blood, and I think there are teams like them, like Villanova, maybe Virginia is getting there, who are kind of embracing a couple things in my mind. Number one, the analytics revolution, the way basketball is now played. And I'm old enough to remember that teams didn't always play this way. It wasn't always about the 3 and the dunk or the layup. There was a lot of teams that took a lot of mid-range shots, long twos, but the analytics revolution that really started in the NBA has now filtered down to a lot of these programs in college. Virginia has embraced it. Villanova has embraced it. Certainly Gonzaga. And they take good, smart shots, and they put themselves in positions to maximize every possession. They know what matters. And that's the first thing. The second thing is Gonzaga and those same other programs have multiple year players. They occasionally get a one and done like Duke or Kentucky, but there haven't been many coming through those places. And yeah, Jalen Suggs is probably one of those, and Zach Collins was 4 years ago, but most of their guys tend to stay for a couple, 3 years at least before they move on. And you build not only teamwork in that way, you get to know each other, but you improve your skill sets. And you really know how to run the offense. You really know what Mark Few wants from his defensive perspective as well. And so that's what they have. And that's what these new bloods, as I'm calling them, also have. So, maybe Michigan is there. Michigan's had a lot of success throughout history. They're not a blue blood, but maybe with Juwan Howard and what John Beilein had built there, maybe you could call them a new blood as well. And there's a few others, but Baylor might be there as well. But that's how I'm differentiating the two. I can't say Gonzaga is a blue blood because they've only really been around as a basketball power since 2000. And that's just not very long in the eyes of sort of the college basketball history landscape.
Yeah, you were mentioning it, but it seems like, Gonzaga's they've always been that they're always pretty good, but I feel like a lot of people don't watch them until the tournament begins.
Yeah.
And I just think it's interesting that, what I think is really entertaining is how Gonzaga is always good, but yet this is their only second Final Four, and they've only been to one championship. And Mark Few has done an excellent job at Gonzaga. I think he's had other chances to leave, and he's done it. Like I said, he's done an excellent job building Gonzaga. But it's just entertaining to see how Gonzaga has been around, has been really good, or has been good for a long time, but only has 2 Final Fours. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, I think that's a really key point as to what makes this Gonzaga team different than all the rest. And I think the people that don't pay attention, right, until March or or never watch Gonzaga until March, they're like, oh, well, they're just like all the other Gonzaga teams. They have a great record. They play in a weaker conference, and they're going to get exposed. But what's different this year, let me ask you a question. Who's the best point guard Gonzaga's ever had prior to Jalen Suggs?
To be honest with you, I can't think right now.
I mean, right, Dan, but the point being, nobody jumps to mind, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's Dan Dickow, maybe it's Williams Goss from the 2017, but nobody that you could say is a verifiable stud, right? That went to the NBA and really succeeded. And this is what makes that team different, because Corey Kispert is a great player, and Drew Timme is also a great player in the college ranks, but they've had a lot of guys like those. They've had guys who could post up. They've had guys who could step out and hit threes on the wing. They've had a lot of those types of players. They've never had an elite point guard, and that's the difference. And that he can go and make things happen in ways as a future NBA star, as a future lottery pick, that they've never had before. And I know it sounds like really almost too simple, but if you look back through their history, that's the missing link for them. And, when it comes down, if they ever do get into a close game, that's a guy who makes the difference, a guy who has the ball in his hands and can create plays.
Yeah, and I do have a question, though, about Jalen Suggs. It seems like he's probably right now the second best player in college basketball. Do you think there is a chance that he maybe gets college? It seems like Luka Garza is going to win that, but do you think Jalen Suggs has an argument for that award?
I think he got diluted by his teammates. If you looked at the AP All-American teams, in fact, he wasn't a first-teamer. Corey Kispert was the only Gonzaga first-teamer. So, his impact is probably going to be more felt from a team perspective than it will be felt in terms of the individual honors and accolades, because we've already seen it with the AP All-American first team versus second team, and usually that tracks pretty well with National Player of the Year honors. But I think he should have been a first teamer. I mean, I think he's that good, and we're going to find out here in the next couple games whether he's everything I think he is.
Yeah, and Luka Garza was really good this year, and I'm from Iowa, so I watched him a lot.
Right.
But it seemed like Luka Garza, I just think that maybe Jalen Suggs has an argument because they were able to make it to the Final Four, and maybe, of course, Jalen Suggs' team is a lot better than Luka Garza's team, but I feel like he has an argument just because he made it all the way to the Final Four, and Garza lost in the second round to Oregon. So
right.
I mean, we'll see what ends up happening. I think Luka Garza is going to get it, and Jalen Suggs, though, will probably have a more successful career in the NBA because I think he's already a lottery pick projection, but it'll definitely be fun to watch his career. So some other teams we're looking at right now. It's been a ride for Houston. I mean, I didn't expect them to be this good. What did you think of their performance on Monday night?
Really impressed with it. They've been kind of hanging around that top 10 all year, but they're even more so than Gonzaga. They're lesser known from a national perspective. Even though Kelvin Sampson's been there a few years now, they had I believe in 2019, they had a run to the Sweet 16, but they just haven't been able to break through, but they play, if you've watched Kelvin Sampson dating back to his days in Oklahoma, 15 or 20 years ago, they have always played exceptional defense. And I got to admit, I'm a basketball fan. I've been for my entire life. I don't always like watching great defense. It uglies up the game, and it makes good teams look bad. But that's what they do. They get in your face. They're physical. They rebound the heck out of the ball. I mean, on the offensive end especially. And in the analytics era again, those are things you have to do. You have to defend and rebound and create turnovers, and they do it really well. So I was really impressed with how they handled Oregon State. I would have certainly liked to have seen them maybe play a tougher opponent on the road to this Final Four, but you play who's in front of you, and I'm not going to take it away from them. They had a really, honestly, probably should have lost to Rutgers I believe that was in round of 32. And they came back there at the end, and a lot of teams sort of choke it away at that point against an underdog, but they held on and certainly were able to get through the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight without dropping another one. So all credit to them. I will say I think Baylor is going to handle them pretty easily, but that's just looking ahead a little bit.
Well, it's really interesting to see because Houston, I feel like, has been good for a while, as you mentioned. They haven't made the Final Four, though, since 1984. And I think a
Right.
lot of people think of Houston as more of a football school than an actual basketball school. So I think that's kind of why people always forget Houston. But I'm kind of shocked. I didn't think they make it to the Final Four. I think in my bracket, I have them going to Elite Eight or Sweet 16 or something like that. What do you think defines this team? What do you think defines this team that it did this year than well, what or sorry what's the difference between this year's team and 2019's team?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it comes down to Quentin Grimes. I mean, he was at Kansas, right? And that's where he started his career. And it really wasn't a great fit for him. But last year he transferred over, and of course he had a great season, but we didn't have a tournament. And this year he really came on, and his shot selection has improved significantly. For a guy like him, that's always one of those things. It's like you can shoot a three at 30% or 30, maybe if you're lucky, 33, 34%, but that's really not an efficient three for a player like him who has such exceptional ball skills and can drive. But now this year, he's at 41% from three. So that's a legit case to shoot that three, right? If he's open, he should be shooting it. And not only that, now the defense has to extend out to him and then be able to cover him on the drives. And he's got exceptional athleticism to finish. So now he's become a more complete offensive player. And we saw that a couple times in this tournament. I will say if there's a way that Houston is going to give Baylor a game, it's going to be through Quentin Grimes and his offensive execution. I don't expect it because I think Baylor's defense is also really impressive and can really frustrate him. But I think he's the difference this year. He's the reason they're in the Final Four.
Yeah, you mentioned. I was actually my next question was gonna be: do you think that Houston needs to win, and in order for them to win, what do you think they need to do to take down the Bears?
Yeah, it's going to be rough. I mean, it's not as big of a mismatch, but it's still, I think, a mismatch. And there's a little bit of sort of interplay here between the two Texas schools too, right? I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of ancient hatreds and rivalries that you and I are unaware of that could make this a more interesting game than it might look on paper. But it's going to come down to it's going to be a defensive battle on both sides because both teams have really excellent defenses, and it's going to then become an issue of which team has one playmaker or multiples that can step up. The issue being, well, the reason I think Baylor is going to win is they have more. They have more of those guys with Davion Mitchell, with Jared Butler. You know, they have guys that if one or two of those are off, they can step up. Whereas for Houston, it's really Grimes. I mean, Sasser is okay, but he's hot and cold. If Grimes doesn't step up and have a game, they have no chance, in my mind, no chance. Anatomy of an upset, we've seen it throughout the tournament history. They have to stay close. They have to put pressure on Baylor. Maybe they will with their defense. If they're within 6-8 points going into the last couple TV timeouts, you know, that's when some crazy things can happen. We just witnessed it last night with Michigan and UCLA. But again, I just think Baylor is going to be able to work up enough of a lead going into the last stretch that it's not going to matter what Quentin Grimes does at that point.
Yeah, you recently mentioned Jared Butler and Davion Mitchell. I mean, they're really good. They had a great game on, was it Tuesday when they took down Arkansas? Do you think, I feel like Baylor's the only team, and before the tournament started, I thought Baylor was the only team that could take down Gonzaga. If they do beat Houston, do you think there's a chance that they take down the Bulldogs? I mean, it's assuming Gonzaga beats UCLA.
Of course, yes, there's a chance. There's more than a sliver of a chance. I mean, they have proven me wrong multiple times this season. You know, last year they had a similar start to the year, Baylor I'm talking about, and got really to the last 2 weeks of the season. I think they were undefeated until that point. And then they lost 3 out of the last 5 in the Big 12 going into the Big 12 tournament. And I'm like, here we go again. You know, once the pressure's on, Scott Drew, and they're caving, right? And this year, kind of the same start, 18-0 to begin the year. Then they go to Kansas. Remember that game in late February? And they really weren't competitive against, as we all knew and found out, a pretty mediocre Kansas team. Then they went to West Virginia after that, and this was a tough game away. And I totally give the Mountaineers a lot of credit for that. But they actually gutted it out. They were down, and they came back and they won in overtime. And that's the first time I was like, now wait a minute. Baylor of the past not only would not have gutted that out and sent that to overtime and won, they would have probably caved mentally. They would have probably lost that game by 15 or 20 points. So that's when I kind of was like, you know what? These guys might be a different level of maturity and kind of resilience than I'm used to with these Baylor teams. So sure enough, they went from there, and they did drop that game to Oklahoma State, which I really just kind of blame on the brilliance of Cade Cunningham. But they've made the run since, and they really haven't been challenged. So I think they could definitely give Gonzaga a game. I think they can win the game, but I would probably put it at about a 60-40. So 60% chance for Gonzaga and 40% for Baylor. And when I break it down, I look at, what we just talked about in terms of a number of these teams. Who has the playmakers, right? So Corey Kispert isn't going to break you off the dribble. Timmy has to get the ball inside. He has to get it in his spots. Now, he has a lot of moves, and he can actually step out somewhat, but he's not going to take the ball from the top of the key and do something with it. So it comes down to Suggs. It's really about Suggs, and then to a certain point, Nembhard and Ayayi. I always struggle with that name as well. They have a couple, maybe 2.5 playmakers, and really Suggs is the guy, though. So you look at that, and you're like, well, now, wait a minute. Baylor actually has more playmakers with Mitchell and with Teague and Butler. So they actually have 3 playmakers, and that's the part where I'm like, if those 3 guys are doing it, and somehow they can keep Timmy from going nuts inside, they're going to be in this game in the last 5 minutes and maybe be able to pull off the upset. And you look at it and you say, you know what? Undefeated teams. It's been 45 years. Maybe there's a chance Baylor does this. I don't think Houston can, but I think Baylor has a pretty good chance.
Yeah, you just mentioned it. Yeah, I think Indiana was the last team to go undefeated, and there's been a few teams that were close, like UNLV, Duke. I think Kentucky a few years ago was really close. Yep. They got beat in the Final Four, even though they won more games than Indiana did. But Jerry, you were talking about Jared Butler. Do you think he has a lot of success in the next level?
I'm gonna give a caveat before I answer that. I have never been good at predicting next level of success. There's been a handful I've hit, and I felt great about it. And then there's been an equal number where I'm like, this guy is going to be awesome. And then, they were playing in the G League in 2 years, or the D League, or whatever it's called. So take that for what it's worth. I think Butler does have a chance to play at the next level. I don't think he has star potential at the next level, but I think he could be a solid role player in the next level, somebody that can get you some threes, somebody that can run an offense. I'm thinking about like maybe a Jared Jack type player, solid guy for a number of years in the league. And in fact, was on some of the Warriors teams that were really good, but he's not going to be a franchise player in my estimation by any stretch.
Your prediction for the championship game, and who do you got winning the game?
I'm going Zags. At this point, I don't see a way to justify going the other way. I think they will run UCLA out of the building. Wonderful story for the Bruins, and if maybe this gets the monkey off the back of Mick Cronin, and he can really start to build something there. I think basketball is better when UCLA is good. And then whether it's Baylor or maybe in a mild upset Houston, I just can't find a way to justify saying that it won't be Gonzaga, like we've talked about. I just can't do it. They just have too many pieces. And as long as Suggs is on the floor, if everything goes to hell, you can still count on him to be able to do some things and get buckets. And that's where it breaks down for so many other teams. So I just expect they'll have a working margin lead for most of a game with Baylor, and eventually they'll pull away. And it probably won't be the most exciting final game we've ever seen, but at least we'll be able to talk about the first unbeaten champion in 45 years.
I've always kind of wanted to know this question. I was actually listening earlier to the Dan Patrick Show, and he mentioned it. But do you think that let me rephrase that. Do you think Gonzaga should move to a different conference like the Pac-12 to get more recognition?
Yeah, that's tricky because the Pac-12 isn't going to take a school that doesn't have football, right? Like high-level football. So that's where it becomes a problem for them. You could say, you can make an argument they could work in something like the Big East, but my goodness, that's 3,000 miles away from the core of the Big East. Maybe something like a Missouri Valley or a Mountain West, but I don't know. I feel like they're comfortable in that league, the West Coast Conference, because it is a bunch of mostly Jesuit schools, mostly Catholic schools, of which they are one, and the travel is not insane. I know they try to play 5, 6, 7, depending on how long the season is. This is a shortened year. Major games outside of that. If you recall, they were scheduled to play Baylor this year. Wouldn't have been something if they played back in December? But maybe it'll make up for it here in a few nights if they get to play the game they never were able to. But I just don't see it. I don't think the West Coast has a league like the Big East that is basketball focused, in which they could do that. And the Pac-12 is just a non-starter because of football.
Yeah, I think they said that Gonzaga had a football team back in the 40s, but stopped it because of World War II and just never returned. But yeah, that would be I don't think they're going to move either, but it's an interesting conversation to see what they think. And I know they've been good in basketball for a while, but I feel like no one really pays attention to them until the tournament, which I guess isn't really a bad thing, because a lot of days, we look at college basketball a lot different than we used to look at it. So we'll see what ends up happening, but yeah, I don't think they're going to move conferences either. Recently, I guess Indiana hired Mike Woodson. I was kind of shocked by that hiring. What did you think of Indiana's new head coach?
Yeah, I was initially shocked, like pretty much everybody else on college basketball Twitter. And I didn't know a lot about Mike Woodson. I'm not as into the NBA as college, although I do follow it to a certain extent. And so I was going off of sort of what I was reading from others. It was a curious hire. I know he's an alumnus there. He didn't have a lot of college coaching experience, any at all, I guess, and very little pro experience. It sounded like my initial read on it was they were trying to do something similar to what Michigan was doing. And there's a lot of copycats in this industry, right? If somebody has success with one thing, you start to see all these other schools try to do the same thing and replicate it. The problem is a lot of those are one-offs. It's just there's not a formula for this stuff usually. And Juwan came into a situation at Michigan where John Beilein had done wonders. They were in bad shape when John Beilein showed up there, and he took them to 2 championship games in something like 8 years there. And they were getting players, and they had a reputation for success that he had built. And Juwan walked into that. And all credit to Juwan for doing great since he's been there, not taking anything away from what he's done the last 2 years. But to say that Indiana could do a similar thing is a leap, because Indiana is not in the situation that Michigan was in. So I liked that I read that they were going to be bringing on some support for Mike Woodson in terms of Thad Matta coming in as an assistant or an associate athletic director, whatever they want to call it, to help with the adjustment to college. But I don't know. I'm kind of taking a wait and see on this. I will admit, I didn't think Juwan Howard was going to be the greatest of hires, and I can own that and say I was completely wrong on that. So maybe I'll be surprised. But looking in the crystal ball right now, I'm thinking this is unlikely to succeed at Indiana. And I was really surprised they didn't make a harder push for any number of college coaches that maybe would be interested. People like Porter Moser up at Loyola, even a Scott Drew, and depending on how this year goes out. At the end of the day, Texas is still a football state, and Baylor is still a football school. And Indiana will never be that. So Indiana's always going to be a basketball school. So you got to wonder if maybe they didn't miss a chance on somebody like that.
Yeah, what I was hearing a lot was people said that bring in Steve Alford, who now is at Nevada, and I thought he was going there too. Or I even heard Rick Pitino maybe, but it feels like he wants to stay at Iona. But yeah, I was really shocked because Mike Woodson's more of an NBA guy. He was with the Knicks, he was with the Hawks. So I'm a little shocked that they went there as well. Another head coaching job that opened right now, of course, Shaka Smart left Texas to go to Marquette. Who do you think the Longhorns end up hiring?
I think the natural fit is Chris Beard if he's willing to move over from Texas Tech. He knows the state. He knows the power and influence that the University of Texas at Austin has in that state. And for those of us, I'm not a Texan, but I know enough to know like it's oversized. I mean, Texas Tech is a big school in a big conference, and they get a lot of players and they have a lot of alumni, but it pales in comparison to what the University of Texas at Austin has in that state. So, the idea being he could own that state. He could own it from a basketball perspective, and they have tons of talent coming up, pumping out of there on an annual basis. And then the resources. If you look at the revenue that the University of Texas has versus any other school in America, it's like not even playing the same same playing field. It's not even close. Alabama, LSU, all the big football schools are well behind what Texas has. So resources are unbelievable. And I'm thinking, why wouldn't someone like Chris Beard take that job? If not, maybe he's happy, and all power to him. He's built that program up, and it's doing great as well. So maybe he doesn't want to leave. You got to think a guy like Pitino might listen to that job, no matter what he says about Iona, and loving it and wanting to reproduce what he did at Providence when he started his career. It's still, how do you turn down a job with unbelievable resources like that, an unbelievable pipeline of recruiting talent, and you're in the Big 12, right? So you're on TV constantly. It's a plum job. It's not the best job in college basketball, but it is an absolutely plum job. And I think they will have some really interested names beyond those two if they decide to go somewhere else.
Before I let you go, can you tell us more about your blog? You were telling me earlier that you've been doing it since 2007. So if you want to just talk more about your blog, and I'll tell my listeners to go check that out. So was there anything else you want to talk about the blog, or?
Yeah, just do a quick pitch here. Rush the Court is the name of the site, and truthfully, we've moved more onto social media since we started it way back. You're making me feel old with telling me about 2007. Back then, everybody was doing blogs. They were writing a lot. Twitter didn't even exist back then. I think it came out in 2008. Facebook was just getting started. So everybody's kind of moving to social media and has moved over there. We do a lot on Twitter, a lot of real-time stuff, communicating with followers and fans, and tweeting throughout the game. So maybe check us out this coming Saturday to interact a little bit and talk about the Final Four. We do a lot of preview and post-view stuff as well, run contests throughout the season. So all that's fun and exciting. But basically at the end of the day, we're just college basketball nuts like and we kind of eat, drink, live this stuff year round. And the folks that we have writing and working for us are the same. So definitely check it out if you have a chance.
Alrighty. Don't forget to check out his blog at Rush the Court. Thanks for joining us, Randy, and hope you have more success with the blog.
Many thanks. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the left. If you want to subscribe to the channel, click on the right.